What's up, everyone? As some of you may know, my favorite deck to play in Chaotic is the Warbeast deck, as Blasphatan is my favorite character. But there's another Mipedian deck that I also enjoy playing and probably have played the second most amount, and this deck is definitely better than the Warbeast deck. And if you guys haven't figured it out already, I'm talking about Mipedian Strike. So in a lot of my tournament videos, you've seen me play this deck, but I haven't made a specific video about the deck itself. So that's what I'm doing today. Here is the classic creature lineup for Mipedian Strike. Usually you're going to see, well, you should always see, 2 Malvadines, and you're usually going to see 2 Owaikis and a Headmaster. And this creature, Ifjan, is the one that usually gets switched around. Sometimes it's Iflar, sometimes you might see Zelf. But I think this is the strongest version of the deck and also the most popular. So Malvadine is your strongest fighter. He's got 65 energy. He has Defender and Air 5 when you control a Royal. And you are running 2 Royals. You have 2 Owaikis. And he's got Invisibility Strike 10. And that means on your first attack, on each combat with Malvadine, your first attack will deal an extra 10 damage. And the whole idea of the deck is to increase the amount of strike damage your attacks will do. So your first attack will deal a significant more amount of damage. And you're also running this attack called Before the Storm. If you have air, this counts as your first attack. So Before the Storm, when you play it, will also get that strike bonus. That's the whole idea around the deck. So Malvadine has strike 10 by himself. Then what Owaiki does, your Mipedians that you control gain 20 speed. If they have invisibility, they gain 20 speed. And they gain invisibility strike 5. And you have 2 of them. So with Malvadine and 2 Owaikis, your Malvadine is going to have invisibility strike 20. Then Headmaster, he himself is a very strong fighter. He's got strike 15. He's got 65 energy. He's a bit weaker than Malvadine because he does not have Air 5. That's what makes him weaker. But the key aspect of Headmaster is invisibility abilities cannot be negated. So if you're fighting a mixed deck, because a lot of mixed decks run Malvadine, because he's one of the 2 main defenders you'll see, the other one being Loma. If you did not run Headmaster and you ran into a mixed deck with Malvadine, how invisibility works usually is when you have 2 creatures with invisibility, the invisibility cancels each other out, so both creatures lose all abilities related to their invisibility. Headmaster makes sure that this doesn't happen. So because invisibility cannot be negated, neither creature will lose their invisibility. So if you're fighting a Malvadine that will have strike 10 and you have your strike 20, because you get the extra +5 from each Owaiki, you're not going to lose that. So that's why Headmaster is important. The other thing, if you lose initiative, your engaged creature gains another strike 10. So if you're attacking with Malvadine, or let's say the opponent's attacking, usually they're going to win initiative on their location. Your Headmaster kind of counteracts them going first because obviously you're going to get an advantage when you win initiative at a location. This kind of makes that advantage less impactful because you're going to deal an extra 10 damage on your attack. So if you're attacking second, you'd have strike 30 with Malvadine. And then Ifjan, final character. So this is the one that gets changed around sometimes because clearly the other ones all work together to increase strike damage and make sure that you don't lose your strike damage. And each of them are strong fighters themselves. Even Owaiki, which are your supports, they have 60 energy and they also have Air 5. They're also very strong. But the reason you run Ifjan is because his ability is so powerful. So Ifjan expend air, so he loses his air element when you use this ability. Target adjacent creature gains untargetable. So that would be, in this case, because he's here, you could use this on any of these creatures, just not the back Owaiki. And you can also use this ability on your opponent. So one use of this is if somebody's targeting your fighter, like Malvadine, let's say you're playing an Underworld deck, they cast Cannon of Casualty on your Malvadine. In response, you can use Ifjan, expend air, on Malvadine, and now he's untargetable. So that cannon will not deal any damage. So that's one use, defensively. You can use it to block hurtful Mugic, hurtful abilities. You can also use it in cases where, let's say the opponent is running the Mugic Elemental Denial. If they cast on your Malvadine and it resolves, he'll lose air. But in response to them casting Elemental Denial, you can use Ifjan on your Malvadine. That'll prevent him from losing his air. Now, the other way to use Ifjan, which I find more fun, is to use it offensively. But what I mean by that is you can cast Ifjan on the opponent's creature. And this is very useful because you can block the opponent from healing their own creature. For example, a lot of overworld decks are able to heal their creatures or have them gain energy through Mugic abilities. Let's say you're playing Wise Guys, like the Avena overworld deck, and you're fighting Avena, and then they cast Carnivore's Keating. That's your creature gains 30 energy and 10 recklessness. They cast it on their Avena. Let's say they're fighting your Malvadine up here. You can use Ifjan in response on their Avena, so now their Carnivores will fizzle out because their Avena is no longer targetable. So that's why Ifjan is so powerful and versatile, because he can be used defensively and offensively. Now, there are a couple creatures that people like to swap Ifjan with, and one of the main one that you're going to see is Iflar. And in case you don't know who Iflar is, this is Iflar. So he doesn't have as much energy as any of the other creatures in this deck, by a lot. But look at his strike. He has Visibility Surprise, first of all, so he's always attacking first. He has Strike 20, and he has Untargetable by default. So the opponent will not be able to use any damaging abilities or any sort of abilities on Iflar. But keep in mind, it also means you can't cast Mugic like Carnivore's Keening on him to keep him alive. But look at his strike. Strike 20, so with a wide key, that's Strike 30. And if you're attacking, well, actually, you're never going to attack second because you have Invisibility Surprise. But you're already getting Strike 30 with him. Now, he's strong, but you see his energy's low. So if the opponent stops that first attack and you don't have a Before the Storm in hand, he doesn't have Air 5. He's kind of useless after that. So that's why I prefer Ifjan, because Ifjan's more versatile. He has a lot more utility, and he's not just another fighter like Iflar. Iflar's just another fighter. That's why I prefer Ifjan. The other creature you might see is Zelf. So Zelf is useful because you can give your fighters range and swift so they can jump the back line. And this is good into some decks that don't have Defender. But again, Ifjan I find to be more useful because he's always able to be used to prevent healing, because there are very few decks that have no healing or energy gain. I think every single deck does, or every single decent deck that I can think of. And he can be used defensively. Now, Zelf is only useful if the opponent does not have Defender. Otherwise, not that useful. He also, the other reason you might run Zelf, and this is more niche, but if you're struggling a lot against overworld decks, a common reason for that is because Strike is very vulnerable to the Mugic Interlude of Interruption. This Mugic here. Negate target Mugic unless the casting creature of that Mugic pays an additional Mugic counter. Now, by default, or the classic version of Strike, again, you have Ifjan. In this case, there are no creatures that have more than one counter. So, if you're facing an overworld deck and you ever try and play Mugic, Interlude will always fully negate that Mugic, because there's no creature you can play a Mugic off that can afford to spend another Mugic counter to make sure the Mugic goes through. So that's one reason it's very hard to defeat overworld decks. But if you have Zelf, he's got 3 counters. So you can play Mugic off him, and if the opponent's playing Interlude, you can afford to spend another Mugic counter, because you have other Mugic counters you can spend to make sure the Mugic goes through. So that's another reason to use Zelf. But at the end of the day, Ifjan is definitely the best option, and I believe the most popular. the gear that can be used in Strike deck is a lot more versatile than the creature options, as I see a lot of different options that people pick. So first off, Malvadine's your strongest fighter, so the gear on him is very important. What I usually run is 2 OKX aprons, so I run it on both of them. Equipped creature gains at the start of combat, flip face down, all battle gear equipped to creatures engage with this. So, Strike's biggest weakness in terms of gear is Zerium armor. Zerium armor, in case you guys do not know what it is, if a equipped creature would take more than 20 damage from attack, it takes 20 damage instead. So the whole point of Strike is that your first attack does like 40, 50 damage, and when you play Before the Storm, you're doing 50, 60, sometimes even 70 damage. Zerium makes this whole concept completely useless. All your damage goes down to 20. So running 2 aprons ensures that anytime Malvadine's fighting, that creature has Zerium, it's flipped down, so it's useless. And oftentimes, creatures are going to run gear that gives them energy, like Evergreen's Tunic or Drill Dozer, and again, Apron will flip those down. And that's why Apron's most popular on Malvadine, because Zerium is one of the biggest weaknesses of the deck. But other times, I see gear like Evergreen Tunic. So this is also a very good gear you can run on Malvadine. If you don't expect to run into Zerium armor that much, or you don't really care what gear the opponent's running, Zerium armor, if your creature has at least 50 courage, it gains 5. 75 courage, it gains an additional 15. Malvadine is 85 courage, so he's gaining 20 energy with Evergreen, so that's very useful. And the other gear I see on him is Torweg. So this gives him another air 5, so he has air 10. Since Strike, you're trying to deal a lot of damage quickly, I prefer running either Apron or Evergreen. Keep Malvadine alive, try and get to Before the Storm, because you're in between attacks. You're already doing 20 with these attacks, so it's very good. Torweg is good. You're going to be doing 25 on average with your 1 BPs. That's a lot of damage. But I find Evergreen to be better. Just keep them alive longer. Draw into those Before the Storms. And again, OKX Apron is my favorite. And then, so for Headmaster, who's your next strongest fighter, usually you're going to see either Drill Dozer, which gives them that 20 energy, or you're going to see Barithian Axe. I believe Barithian Axe is the more popular option. It still gives them 5 energy. You see he's got 75 power, but it also gives them Intimidate energy 10. So any creature he fights against is going to lose 10 energy at the start of combat. This is useful because it brings them more into one-shot range, because if you're fighting a 60 energy creature and then they're down to 50, if you play like Air Salt and you have Mipedian waste with additional 10 damage on first attack, you can get up to 50 damage on your first attack and you can one-shot them. But the idea is you're just bringing them lower energy, so you can kill them more quickly with your strike damage. But the problem I find with Barithian Axe is if your first attack gets negated and you don't have a Before the Storm, Headmaster's pretty weak in terms of damage output. Like his 1 BPs are going to be doing only 10 to 15 damage. So I prefer Drill Dozer to keep him alive for longer, so we can draw into the Before the Storms or just play more attacks. Because Barithian Axe, I think, is only the better option when that first attack is going to go through. Honestly, you could even run Torweg on him, because Headmaster's biggest problem is that after his first attack, he's not doing much damage, and Torweg helps that because he gets Air 5. Then on Awaiki, I like to run Mipedian Fulgurite. So Awaiki, they're supports. This is your last option for combat, but they're still very formidable, and they're going to defeat any other support, probably, in combat, and they can defeat some fighters. But Mipedian Fulgurite makes them even stronger. So it just gives them Air 10. At the end of combat, it is destroyed. But if Awaiki's fighting, there should only be 1 or maybe 2 max fighters on the other team. And this is going to give them Air 15 total for 1 combat. So that's a lot. So this way, Awaiki's not really relying. They don't have that invisibility, so they're not getting the strike bonus. But their attacks are going to do a lot of damage. Like Atmosphere, well, that he doesn't have invisibility, but this is going to deal 25 damage because he's got Air 15. Air Assault's going to deal 30. It's a lot of damage with the Fall Guide. So I like to run it on both of them. I do sometimes see Phoenix Belt. Okay, clearly I can't type. Where's the Phoenix Belt? There it is. Phoenix Belt on a Waiki, so they both have fire. And what Phoenix Belt is, if you sacrifice it and your creature has fire, it's going to deal 20 damage. And so if you're running Phoenix Belt, you also want to run the attack Sirocco. Flip a face down Battlegear you control face up if you have air. And obviously your fighters have air. So if you're running Phoenix Belt, you're going to run two of these, two Siroccos. And you can use this Phoenix Belt off a Waiki. So this will make it, this is better for when your Malvadines are fighting. And they can get this extra 20 to 40 damage for one combat. But I prefer Fulgurite to make the Awaikis more formidable when they do enter combat. Especially when I'm running Ifjan, because sometimes I'm going to be wanting to use Ifjan to make the opponent untargetable, and that might mess up Phoenix Belt, because if the opponent's untargetable, I can't exactly target them with Phoenix Belt. And then gear for Ifjan, I have Weightless on him right now. Weightless Energy Vessel means he cannot be the target of Mugic cards. This is good if you're fighting burn decks, because they cannot use Can of Casualty, any other Mugic to try and kill Ifjan. You can also run Chaler on him. So if you're running it to decks that use more ability damage to try and kill creatures, he cannot be the target of ability. So like, for example, Phoenix Belt cannot be used on him in this case, because some burn decks run Phoenix Belt. You could also run something like Ozli's Wreck. So if you're not worried about burn decks trying to kill your Ifjan, you can just give them a gear so that if the opponent ends up attacking your Ifjan, he's unable to be defended, or they have Purial Force, which makes Defender useless. You can take down the opponent's gear in the process, because you're not really going to win fights with Ifjan. So basically, you're just assuming he's going to lose. Now, the attack deck, the whole idea of the attack deck is you want to get to Before the Storm as fast as possible, because this is how you win combats. So you have Meditative Leap, which is what's called a looter. And what that means is it helps cycle through your attack deck. So if you have at least 100 speed, when you play Meditative Leap, you can draw an attack card and discard an attack card. So that'll help cycle through your attacks. So you have two of those, and you have two Synaptic Accelerations, which can do the same thing. And then your other 1 BPs, just trying to do as much damage as possible. So with Malvadine, because he's got Air 5, your 1 BPs are all going to do 20 damage. Atmosphere is 20, Hammer Dash is 20. He meets both of these stat checks. Inferno Gust, you're going to have 140 speed, because your Waikis give plus 20 speed each to creatures with invisibility. So you're almost always going to be winning this challenge, speed challenge. So that's 20. Air Assault's also 20. And obviously, you got Before the Storm. Then for your zeros, Flying Advantage is a great zero for having air. With Malvadine, you're going to be dealing 5 and healing 5 at the same time. Again, you should be almost always winning speed challenges. And then for these last two zeros, I like Tornado Tackle, because if you get 2 Before the Storms, let's say in the first half of your attack deck, and you have Tornado Tackle, play it, your attack deck gets shuffled again. So you don't have to go through 9 more attacks before you get a chance to redraw Before the Storm. And then next doors as well helps you cycle a little bit, because you get to look at the top 2 cards of your attack deck, rearrange them. If you're worried about losing your elements, you can run Vapor Wipeout. I'd run it only at 1 copy, and this lets you gain air. And if you're not worried about losing your elements, and like a certain matchup where you're running this, easily discard it with one of your looters. Oh, let's do, what did I have here? I had next doors. Now to talk about the Mugic, the most powerful Mipedian Mugic is Melody of Mirage. Target attack deals 0 damage. And so you're going to run 2 of these. I think almost every single Mipedian deck I run into runs Melody of Mirage at 2 copies. And then I also like to run Aegis Area. So this is also another Mugic that can be used to counter attacks. You negate the target attack, but its downside is the next attack played deals 0 damage. So if you're using it on your opponent's attack, your next attack is going to deal 0. So if you're using it on opponent's attack, you only want to do it when they have like a very strong attack and you're out of Melody of Mirages. Or if their attack has some sort of ability that might screw you over. This could be true when Whirling Whale was unbanned. It's banned right now, but if it ever comes off, your opponent may not play Mugic cards. This is very strong and can make you just lose a combat. So it'd be worth using Aegis Area against this because Aegis Area fully negates the attack. So anything that has to do with the attack does not go through, whereas Melody of Mirage only makes the attack deal 0. So if you use Mirage on Whirling, you're still unable to use any more Mugic for the rest of the turn actually. But if you negate it, that's not the case. The other way that you can use Aegis, and this is specific to the mirror match, so when you're fighting another strike deck, let's say you're attacking first, and again, it's a strike deck, so your first attack deals a ton of damage, their first attack also deals a ton of damage. So you play an attack, and they're like, okay, this is your first attack, I'm going to use Melody of Mirage. So they use Melody of Mirage on your first attack, this Mugic. So your first attack is going to deal 0 damage. On that same burst, then this is only if you've attacked first, you can cast Aegis Area on your own attack. So it's already going to deal 0 damage because they've cast Melody of Mirage. So you're just negating it. It's not going to make any difference. Only difference would be if you're playing a looter, because if they make it deal 0, you're still going to cycle. If you negate it, you won't be able to cycle. But it's worth it in any case because the next attack play deals 0 damage. So you're negating your own attack that's already dealing 0, but now the opponent who's playing strike and whose first attack is always strong, their attack's going to deal 0 because that's the next attack that's going to be played. So that is a cool tech that you can use in the mirror match. Then these other two Mugics, so Song of Shelter, I like to run when Burn is popular. Target creature you control may not be the target of Mugic or abilities until the end of turn. So Song of Shelter I find to be really useful when paired with Ifjan. Let's say you're going to a burn deck, they play Cannon of Casualty on your Malfadine, and you use Ifjan on your Malfadine. Then the opponent on that same burst might stack a bunch of abilities in Mugic to try and kill your Malfadine anyway, before he becomes untargetable. You can let them stack it, and then you can cast Song of Shelter on that same burst, and that'll negate everything they've stacked on the burst that would have resolved before your Ifjan. Now, Song of Shelter is going to resolve before that, and all of that will not resolve. It'll fizzle because your Malfadine becomes untargetable a lot earlier. So Song of Shelter is very strong when paired with Ifjan. Then Strain of Expensive Dilutions. This is because, again, gear can be really annoying when you're playing Strike when the opponent has Zerium armor. The other reason you're running Strain of Expensive Delusions, because as you can see in this lineup, you only have 5 Mugic counters. So Strain is a Mugic that doesn't cost any Mugic counters. And how it works is, you get to destroy all Battlegear equipped to creatures at target Mirage location. So when you're running this deck, you have 4 different Mirage locations, Hunter's Perimeter and Royal Mipedian Academy. So you get to choose where you put that Mirage location when it gets on the board. So what you can do is you can throw it on your opponent's fighter that's going to be the hardest to deal with, or some support that you want to get rid of their, like Heptad's Crown. Throw it on them, cast Strain, destroy their gear. And then your final Mugic is Carnivore's Keening. So this is very versatile. You gain 30 energy and Recklessness 10. So it's good when your creature's about to die, but the opponent's also super low, so you can save like your Malfadine, and you just need one more attack to defeat the opponent. It's also good when the opponent's trying to burn maybe like one of your supports, trying to burn a Waiki, trying to burn Ifjan. Not in this case because you have Weightless, so you can't cast Carnivores on him. But if you had Chowler on Ifjan, you could cast Carnivores on him. Just very versatile Mugic. Now, if you're struggling against Burn, even with Song of Shelter and Carnivores, what I would do is I would swap Aegis for another Carnivore's Keening. And with 2 Carnivores and 1 Song of Shelter, you should definitely be fine against any form of burn. Another swap you could do if you're struggling against gear, let's say you're struggling against Overworld because if they're running Avena and Garv, and Avena has Zerium, they can flip that Zerium back up even if you have OKX Apron. You can run a Mugic called Armament Adagio. You can choose 2 target creatures controlled by the same player and swap gear on those creatures. So instead of just flipping it down, it's swapped. So it's permanently gone on their fighter. Don't have to worry about it anymore. So that is a good Mugic to run as well. Now to look at the locations. You're running Hunter's Perimeter and Royal Academy. One reason would be because of Strain, but it's also just a very good location in general. Hunter's Perimeter lets you cycle through your locations because when it pops up and you start a combat, it gets cycled and you get to reveal a new active location. And Royal Academy is great against burn. It's also great against Overworld because the other biggest Mugic counter to strike, other than Melody of Mirage, which makes your attack deal 0, is Rhyme of the Reckless. When target attack controlled by opponent resolves, deal X damage to target engaged creature, where X is the damage that attack dealt. So oftentimes when you run into Overworld, you play your first attack dealing like 40 damage. They play Rhyme, your Malvadine also took that 40 damage. Nice thing about Royal Academy is if they play Rhyme on this location, it won't actually deal any damage to your Malvadine because non-attack damage is reduced to 0. Yes, the damage is calculated based on how much damage your attack does, but the actual damage is being dealt by the Mugic. So it gets reduced to 0. And then Crystal Cave is rarely good. You're making the opponent's first attack deal 0 damage in almost every single matchup. You may get screwed against if you're playing Blazvitan, he's got 150 speed, or if you're playing a Lenker deck where they can up their creature's speed. But I'd say 97, 98% of matchups, at least when I'm playing, I never run into these scenarios. You're going to be fine. Just if you're facing a Warbeast deck with Blazvitan, usually there's other targets you can fight. Just attack something else. Storm Tunnel is really good. You're going to get additional Air 5, and water decks are pretty popular right now. So this also has that added bonus where water attacks are reduced by 5. The Mipedian Oasis, very good because you're getting an extra 10 strike damage. So this is great. Your first attack deals an extra 10. Before the Storm is also going to deal an extra 10. Some swaps you could make is you could swap Mipedian Oasis for this location called Grand Hall. I've been playing this location a little bit because there's been a lot of fluid morphers, especially because Drornik is unbanned. And how this location works is when a Mugic counter is removed from a creature, Grand Hall of Mugic Summit deals 10 damage to an engaged creature controlled by the same player. So if you're running to a deck with some fluid morphers with abilities like Mokkadan or Dror, when they play their ability, their engaged creature is going to lose a lot of health. Another swap you could do is for Puro Forest. Now this is especially good if you're running the Zelf version of Strike, because Zelf paired with Puro Forest can let you jump to the back line and completely ignore defender. So you can snipe a support that way. It's also good in general because a lot of decks have supports in the front line. Like for example, Strike has Ifjan in the front line. And Danian decks, this is also very good against because they always rely on Alexia giving everyone defender, and this completely negates that. So if you're struggling, especially with Danians, this is a good location you could throw in. Then one other location you could throw in, instead of Storm Tunnel, if you're struggling a bit against Burn, because this initiative is power, so you're going to lose initiative against Burn decks, I would swap the Storm Tunnel for Sands of the Unseen. This makes the initiative Courage. You'll win that more times. I think you still lose to Kaor, but you'll win against other underworld creatures. Or if it's like Ursus Burn or something, you beat Ursus in Courage initiative. And also you're getting an extra 10 strike damage. Now, I didn't cover every single possible deck building option for Mipedian Strike. It'd be cool for me to see what you guys come up with for the deck, and if you have any suggestions at all, I'd love to hear them. Just leave a comment on the video. Maybe I'll cover it in a future video. And also, if you guys enjoy deck guides, because I do enjoy making these, I've been wanting to make another one since I think my first video ever was the War Beast deck guide. So I've been wanting to make no more deck guides, so I decided to make one on Mipedian Strike. If you guys like these videos and there's a specific deck you want me to cover, please let me know down in the comments and I can cover that in the future. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Peace for now.